The last time I flew on an airplane was March 18th. I was headed back home to New York City from Cleveland, Ohio, where I was covering the state's primary election. Coronavirus was just setting in, and the election was postponed. It was the start of a national postponement of everything. That flight was the loneliest flight I'd ever been on. I was one of just 3 people on the entire plane. And to think, I was well on my way to Delta's platinum status. That too has been postponed. The coronavirus has gutted the travel industry. U.S. airlines have lost more than 90% of their passengers and are projected to lose tens of billions of dollars in revenue this year. Those are astonishing numbers, but the desire to travel, that's not going anywhere. A survey by a leading travel industry site found 1/3 of all Americans say they hope to travel within 3 months after restrictions are lifted. And as we've seen, restrictions are being lifted. States and countries are beginning to reopen. And even now, people are traveling.
I just have my mask with the filter in it and then gloves, hand sanitizer, Lysol wipes.
Disinfectant that I carry with me, just pull it out of my pocket after touching anything that, everybody else touches.
I'm Tremaine Lee. This is Into America. Today, the future of flying. Will it ever be the same? Will America's major airlines survive? And if you do fly, what does that look like during a pandemic? I talked to the go-to guy when it comes to covering space and aviation, NBC correspondent Tom Costello, who's been on this beat for a very long time. American airports look nothing like he's ever seen.
Good day from Reagan Airport. The words you hear most often to describe the situation is apocalyptic, bankruptcy, and depression.
Thank you, Tom. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
How long have you been covering aviation, and how did you actually get into this beat?
So I've been at the NBC News Washington Bureau now for 15 years, hard to believe, and I inherited this beat from a legendary correspondent at NBC News by the name of Bob Hager. Bob retired about 9 months after I started with NBC News, and then I fell into this beat.
Many of us are used to seeing you at these airports, delivering the news. Sometimes it's heartbreaking stuff, tragedy, right? Accidents. Other times you're breaking down the analysis of the business for us. But now we see you reporting from Reagan National and LaGuardia, and it's desolate and it's lonely and it's a little bit eerie seeing you there. How does it actually feel being in those spaces now?
I was just over at Reagan Airport a couple of days ago. There was nobody in my live shot behind me, save one construction worker who worked the overnight shift and was going home. And you could see him in his orange vest walking away. It's a ghost town. It's eerie. And my concern is that this is really a very strong indicator of what's happening to the economy right now. And it's terrible. The airline industry is the lifeblood of the economy. And as goes the airline industry, so goes the economy. And it is in serious, serious trouble.
How much of a dip are we actually looking at in terms of travelers?
The airlines had been down 95%. In other words, passenger volume down 95%. At the moment, it's down about 90%. So we've seen a very small increase of people coming back. But in hard numbers, about 215,000 people flying every day now nationwide. Compare that to 2.6 million a year ago.
Goodness.
So we are down substantially.
How are you even able to social distance at an airport or in an airplane? Like, what safeguards are in place for passengers?
So, first of all, people are flying because people have to get places, right? That's the bottom line. You're not seeing families getting in an airplane and going to Disney World. Disney World is closed anyway. Hotels are shut down, right? And no matter where you want to go, once you get there, what are you going to do? That's a big problem. But listen, you still have medical professionals flying across the country. You've got government officials who need to get places. You got, God forbid, you got families who need to get to another city because they just lost a loved one or somebody's on life support. So yes, people are flying, but it's a fraction of before. But really, to the point of, how do you try to social distance inside an airport or inside a plane? The TSA and the airports are trying to increase social distancing at the checkpoints themselves to keep people 6 feet away. Many airports, not all, many airports are requiring that you wear a mask. Once you get to the boarding zone, if you will, to the actual gate, the airlines, almost all of them, are also engaging in social distance when you get on board the plane. They're trying to keep 6 feet at least between all passengers when you board, and they're boarding from the back forward so that you're not constantly trying to squeeze past somebody and rubbing shoulders. What they're saying is they are trying to keep the middle seat open, but they are not guaranteeing it. They are not promising that. And no, they are not blocking middle seats. Let's be honest. They are on their knees financially. They need every seat filled that they can fill. And so they are filling up these seats. If they can get passengers, they'll do it. And listen, there are many fewer flights today than there were just a few months ago. So if you're flying from New York to LA, you're not going to have nearly as many options. There are very few flights. And as a result, those flights that are going are going to be a lot fuller than they normally might have been, or than they would have been even a few weeks ago when they were literally deserted. You had just 5-10 people on board.
What have airlines done to institute any policy around mask wearing?
Yeah, every airline right now is requiring masks. You as a passenger must wear them, and they're requiring them of their crew members as well.
How much of this is mandatory? What happens if we're 30,000 feet in the air and I decide, you know what, I'm taking this mask off, I can't breathe, I'm uncomfortable. Does the flight crew have to be sky cops essentially?
Yeah, that's a great question. They are mandating the mask when you board. They're asking passengers, when you're on board, please keep the mask on. I was talking to an expert at Vanderbilt University just a couple of days ago who said if you are in a plane and you cough or you sneeze, that discharge can travel 2 rows ahead of you and behind you. However, the airlines have also sent out the directives to their airline flight attendants saying, we don't need to get into an altercation over this. If the airlines are telling their staffs, their flight attendants, if somebody on board suddenly takes off the mask and refuses to wear it, you can talk to them. You can implore them, please, you're doing this for everybody on board. But ultimately, they don't want to become the traffic cops in the skies. And so they'll probably walk away and avoid a confrontation.
That doesn't sound like that would give confidence to a lot of folks if you're saying that people sneeze and it goes several rows in front and behind. And then when you're eating your peanuts, you're drinking your little coffee, then what? You have to take the mask off anyway, right?
Yeah, listen, Dr. Schaffner at Vanderbilt University, who's one of the top infectious disease experts in the country, said, the truth is you should not fly. That's the bottom line. Because it is, in his words, the exact kind of environment that the coronavirus wants to spread.
So, Tom, you have this perfect environment. You have a lot left to personal responsibility, right? Folks, just make sure you keep your mask on and act accordingly. But just practically speaking, getting in the plane, getting off the plane, and we all know we have those folks who, as soon as you land, they're standing up in the aisle, crowding the space. Is there anything that could be done just moving folks in and out of these airplanes?
So, as I mentioned, the airlines are trying to board from the back forward to avoid everybody squeezing past each other. And on exiting the plane, they're trying to start from the forward to the back. But you're right. Regardless, everybody's going to stand up. You're going to be waiting to go, and you're going to be far closer than 6 feet. And the airlines are going to implore people, please play along here, because we all understand what the stakes are. But human nature is human nature. I was on a plane one time flying into Denver. This is pre-pandemic, by the way. While I was on board this flight, a lady behind me had a stroke. And there were people on board, doctors and nurses trying to help her. And the flight attendant came on board and said, ladies and gentlemen, we've declared an emergency. We're going into Denver. Paramedics are standing by at the gate. We're going to ask you all, please remain seated. Do not get up. Paramedics need to board this plane. It's an emergency. We landed, emergency clearance. Sure enough, people stood up because they had to make their business meeting. And the flight attendant got on and said, ladies and gentlemen, sit down or I will have you arrested. They all sat down pretty quickly.
That's the kind of thing that scares me because, we can all be a little selfish, but also the airlines. Are they so antsy economically, right, that they want to put the profits over the safety of the people? I'm just concerned all the way around.
I would say I don't see that. The airlines recognize the only way that they're going to remain viable, that they're going to be profitable again and flying in full force, is if they can do everything possible to ensure your safety as a passenger. I don't see them putting profits over safety. I think that they all recognize they go hand in hand. But to that end, there is now open talk within the airline industry that we may lose one or more airlines as a result of this pandemic. I mean, they are now burning through $50 to $100 million per day per airline. Delta, $50 million burn rate right now. American hopes to get their burn rate down to $50 million. So this is an extreme emergency for the airlines. Now, when the airlines signed up for this government money, they got $25 billion in government money. They had to promise that they would keep their employees through September 30th. But they've all said, listen, come October 1st, you should expect layoffs in a big way. Most estimates have at least 100,000 people will lose their jobs in the airline industry alone come the fall. Delta Airlines is now saying that it will have 7,000 too many pilots come December. This is not going to suddenly bounce back in the third or fourth quarter of the year. Most experts believe we're talking about a 2 to 5 year process before airline travel resumes. And so they are going to have to start cutting jobs. Now, think about that. For every job you cut in the airline industry, whether it's a ticket agent or the person who's helping you check your bags in the SkyCap, or whether it's the pilot or the flight attendant, how many other jobs are connected? Right? The taxi driver who drove the passengers to the airport, the people who work in the airport in the concession stands. I mean, and then, by the way, all the jobs associated with servicing the airplanes and catering. I mean, the list is endless. So we are talking about a terrific and terrible toll, unemployment slapping the airline industry in the face come the fall.
To hear you say that is alarming. And I wonder, is the industry so critical and so important to the American economy that there will be another round or some aid or bailout money aimed at the airline industry just to make sure that they are able to stay afloat?
I've not heard real discussion that Congress would give them more money. $25 billion is a lot of money. And oh, by the way, they also gave them another $25 billion in loans, low interest loans. So the idea is to get them over the hump, to hopefully let them survive. But keep in mind, there was also an awful lot of animosity towards the airline industry over the last few years because they were not, in many cases, stockpiling cash for a bad day. They were buying back their stock. And as a result, many of them did not have the cash reserves to weather this kind of a downturn. Now, nobody would have expected this kind of a downturn, right? This is a once in a 102 or 20 year event. However, that is one reason why there's not a lot of optimism or a lot of, positivity about giving the airlines endless amounts of cash.
We'll be right back. Under the best case scenario, do you imagine once we see our way through this, how close to the pre-pandemic version of airlines and airline travel do you think we'll get to? Will we ever return to what it used to be?
So all I can tell you is what, the airport CEOs and the airline execs are forecasting and talking about, and the Wall Street analysts. And all of them think it will take at least 2 years to return to 2019 passenger levels. Maybe more like 5 years, and the pessimist will say up to 10 years.
Wow.
But keep in mind the scenario here. A typical American family that is not traveling for business, a typical American family travels one time a year on a plane. That's it, once a year. So if you consider now that we have 30 to 40 million people unemployed in this country, they are burning through their cash reserves right now just to be able to feed the family and pay the rent and, pay for the kids' orthodontics or whatever the case may be. They're not going to have the money when suddenly things start lifting again. They're not going to have the money to get on a plane and go to Disney World. That's just the reality. You're not going to see a return of the leisure traveler in force, in mass, I think, for years. Now, the other part of the equation is, as you know, airlines make their money off of the business traveler, right? The men, the women who fly, in some cases, every single day. You'll see the same guys and the same women multiple times during a week. Now businesses have completely eliminated business travel because of the pandemic. And guess what? They're finding out Zoom works pretty well.
Right, right.
And so why should I pay for my men and women to fly over the country to make sales calls or to meet one-on-one with people when Zoom works pretty well? If I have to cut one thing and I'm a CEO or a bean counter at a company, corporate travel is going to be one of those priorities. So, I think personally we're talking about 4 to 5 years.
So, Tom, you talk about these massive layoffs, but how does it actually change flying itself? And will the experience of flyers change?
There are going to be fewer options is the bottom line, right? All of the options are going to shrink. There will be fewer flights going from city A to city B. And as a result of fewer flights, the flights that are flying, you may have more people than you would expect once we start seeing a pickup in traffic. If there are fewer flights, the airlines may charge more for the few flights that there are.
And I wonder why you think the government hasn't stepped in to maybe, in the meantime, really regulate the industry, really put, a pause on the air travel, because part of the reason we're in this situation is because of how air travel helped kind of facilitate the spread of this virus. Is there any talk, you think, of clamping down in the meantime? Because just one person with coronavirus sneezing and coughing in aisle 13 could create havoc.
Yeah, so there is talk in Congress right now about mandating that airlines must keep the middle seat open. To borrow a phrase from President Trump, I honestly think that's DOA. I don't see that you're going to see most members of Congress, especially Republican members of Congress, have any appetite for telling the airlines that they've got to take out X number of seats on their planes or block them when these airlines are fighting for their very survival. I just don't see that.
Given all that we've talked about, how can a passenger really assess the risk of taking a flight? Because if they do everything right, mask, gloves, hand sanitizer, no middle seat, there is still no way to account for the behavior of other people who are going inside this flying tube. How can they make their best assessment of whether it makes sense to fly?
All I can do is tell you the advice that I've been given by the top, virus control people in the country. If you are going to fly, if you have to fly, and people do have to fly, then wear the mask. Keep in mind, N95 masks are reserved for medical professionals and frontline firefighters and the like. If somebody in the family has one you can borrow, not a bad idea. I got to tell you, a lot of people are now suggesting that you wear goggles, like the racquetball goggles, to protect your eyes, because you're not just vulnerable from breathing something in through your nose and your mouth, but also if a drop lands in your eye. Wear gloves, use Purell. If you can, bring your own Clorox wipes, and be very mindful of everything you're touching. And then we all have a tendency to put hand to face when we're thinking, like you are right now, like I have been through this whole interview. And we need to stop that, especially if we've been in an environment where we could have picked something up. That's hard to do when you've been alive for decades and you're used to doing this, right? But that's something we all need to consider.
Tom, how comfortable do you feel flying? And would you, load your family on an airplane right now?
So my wife is European, and we go to Europe every summer to see her family. And right now we're not going. And that's really bothersome to all of us because we want to see family, and that's important. So no, I'm not comfortable traveling internationally right now. Domestically, I have to fly to Florida in a couple of weeks to cover a SpaceX rocket launch. And, I don't think it's likely that I'll be one of only 10 people on board. I think that we're going to be sitting shoulder to shoulder. And we are talking, how am I going to do that safely? And I think it's going to be all of the above. It's going to be the mask. It's going to be the goggles, perhaps. I'll look very silly, but you can make fun of me. That's fine. It'll be the Purell and the Clorox wipes and all of that, and just trying to be very mindful.
So Tom, you're on this flight, and the passenger next to you, they decide they're taking his mask off, and they let out a cough, a sneeze. How do you respond? What do you do in that situation?
I think I'd give him a real dirty look to begin with, and I'd say, buddy, come on, please, can you keep the mask on? But you don't want to get into a fist fight over this. And, listen, the chances are he or she is not contagious. He or she does not have the virus, right? But it certainly would be unnerving if that happened. Part of the problem here, as you know, is we still have to go on with our lives. And the economy needs to move, and we need to pick up the pace if we can. So there is no end-all be-all that keeps you 100% safe unless you stay home. And really, that probably is the best scenario in terms of flying. If you don't have to, just simply don't.
Tom, it will actually warm my heart to see you full hazmat suit, goggles, the gloves for your next live hit.
Yeah, my wife wants me to wear a painter's suit, those white painter suits, and then I'm going to have the goggles and the mask, and, oh my goodness gracious.
These are strange, strange times. Tom, I want to thank you. You're such a trusted voice in this space, so thank you for taking the time to talk with us. We really appreciate it.
Okay, buddy. Good to see you. Take care.
Into America is produced by Isabel Angel, Allison Bailey, Aaron Dalton, Max Jacobs, Barbara Rabb, Claire Ty, Aisha Turner, and Preeti Varthan. Original music by Hannes Brown. Our executive producer is Ellen Frankman. Steve Lichtai is executive producer of audio. I'm Tremaine Lee. We'll be back on Thursday.